Hey, Fidelity. How can I remember to invest every month?
With the Fidelity app, you can choose a schedule and set up recurring investments in stocks and ETFs.
Oh, that sounds easier than I thought.
You got this.
Yeah, I do. Now, where did I put my keys?
You will find them where you left them.
Investing involves risk, including risk of loss. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC, member NYSE, SIPC.
This episode is brought to you by Redfin. You're listening to a podcast, which means you're probably multitasking. Maybe even scrolling home listings on Redfin, saving homes without expecting to get them. But Redfin isn't just built for endless browsing. It's built to help you find and own a home. With agents who close twice as many deals, when you find the one, you've got a real shot at getting it. Get started at redfin.com. Own the dream.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix's Remarkably Bright Creatures. What if a Pacific octopus held the key to a mystery that could heal your heart? Well, that's Tova's reality. An elderly widow working at an aquarium. Tova forms an unlikely friendship with the curmudgeonly Marcellus, whose remarkable intelligence leads her to a life-changing discovery. Remarkably Bright Creatures is now playing, only on Netflix.
Alberta separation is currently polling at about 30%, but that may not be telling the whole story. Hi, welcome to the Full Comment Podcast. My name is Brian Lilly, your host. We have separatist movements on the eastern part of the country in Quebec and now in the western part of the country. Prime Minister Mark Carney has apparently told his cabinet to take the Alberta separatist movement seriously. It's not clear that all of them are, and in much of the commentariat in central and eastern Canada, Alberta separatism is dismissed, and yet it is a growing movement that should be taken as something to be concerned about. Today, we speak to someone from the movement on why they want to break up Canada, why they don't see a path forward in terms of finding a new deal, and what is driving all of this. Keith Wilson is a lawyer from St. Albert, just outside of Edmonton. He is not affiliated with any of the many groups advocating for separatism, but is one of the leading voices on the issue in the province. And he joined us from St. Albert. So, Keith Wilson, let me ask you, why does a nice boy from Burlington, Ontario, want Alberta to separate?
Because I want a bright and prosperous future for my kids and grandkids, and I'm deeply disturbed about the direction of Canada. And it looks like Canada is going to continue to go in a deep, dark direction, and Alberta doesn't have to.
Okay. Those are nice platitudes. Those are nice things to say, but expand on that for me because, look, you and I have talked before. We've had debates in hotel lobbies, sitting at the bar till late in the evening. I know you. I respect you, but I disagree with you. Explain why Alberta is not getting, in your view, the right deal from Canada. Or is it even the right deal for Canada? Does it go beyond getting a deal from Canada? Walk me through step by step why Alberta should pull back from Confederation.
Because Confederation is holding Alberta back. Confederation is dysfunctional. Canada is not working in every respect that I can think of that makes sense to talk about. And Alberta has incredible people. We have incredible resources. We have the youngest workforce in Canada. We're the largest net contributor to the Canadian pension plan. We would be immediately better off. Our seniors would be immediately better off by Alberta leaving and having our own pension plan. We are supporting pensioners in the rest of the country. We have the third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world. We have 5 refineries. Australia has 2. We are a net exporter of all kinds of things the world wants, including agricultural products. Our canola industry is larger than the automotive industry in Ontario alone. So we have so much going for us, but we're constantly being held back by the ideologues in Ottawa, as manifest this morning by the comments, or yesterday, I guess it was, by the comments of the Prime Minister, where he doubled down on his ideological obsession with net zero.
What did he say there?
I was at the announcement in Quebec relating to some service contract for the aviation sector with AirAsia, and he was a reporter put to him the question or the comments made by the CEO of Cenovus, a very large oil and gas company in Alberta, where the CEO pointed out, as several other CEOs have pointed out, which is that the world consumers, the buyers of oil and gas, will not pay a premium for the extremely expensive net zero carbon capture and carbon taxes that Carney is insistent upon, and that the government needs to stop being, quote, myopically focused on climate change issues because the world doesn't care, that the customers don't want it. Carney doubled down and said, no, that's exactly what buyers want, which is ironic. And he particularly pointed to Asia, which is ironic because one of the areas in which Cenovus operates and sells into is the Asian market.
Yeah. Cenovus knows Asia well. They have operations there. But also Asia gets an awful lot of its oil from Iran, if we're talking about China, from Persian Gulf states, which I don't think they're looking to decarbonize their oil in the same way. So I do understand that. The Prime Minister does keep saying, though, that he is an Edmonton Oilers fan, that he's originally from the territories, that he grew up in Edmonton, that he understands the West. I'm guessing you don't see it that way.
Well, if he's just wrong. I mean, he's just simply wrong. What has he been right on? But it doesn't matter because, the test for Alberta leaving and becoming an independent country shouldn't be measured on because a moment in time in Ottawa, there's a politician who happens to be prime minister who makes lots of bad policy decisions and is an ideologue. That shouldn't be the test. It's a sort of a complementary reason, but Albertans are reaching the conclusion at a more fundamental level. We don't have the same culture as the rest of the country. Look at the policy that the Smith government here brought in with respect to schools. The primary role now of education in Alberta is math, science, social studies, core curriculum, not ideological teachings, not woke politics, not identity politics. And that's been very, very well received here in Alberta. Whereas the rest of the country seems to think that those are important cultural values. So Alberta has a very different culture. We believe in smaller government. We believe in taking risks. We believe in entrepreneurialism. Whereas increasingly the rest of Canada seems to be focused on what is the government going to do for me today.
So you mentioned that the decision on whether Alberta should stay or go shouldn't be based on a particular person in office. Is there the potential for a different deal for Alberta? I'm sure some people would say yes, but I'm asking you specifically. If there was, we think back to the firewall letter that Stephen Harper and Ted Morton and others wrote more than 20 plus years ago, almost 25 years ago, called for Alberta to start its own pension plan, which still isn't all that popular in Alberta, by the way. For Alberta, and by the way, Quebec has its own pension plan. For Alberta to collect its own taxes the way that Quebec does, to have their own provincial police force the way Ontario and Quebec do, to start setting provincial healthcare policy directly, which Premier Smith is now doing, and to push for Senate reform. Senate reform is not going to happen. But let's say that someone came forward and said, on those other four, we can get a deal. Does that change anything for you?
Well, no, because I don't think it's realistic. You're also the other provinces would have to be willing to address equalization. Albertans are so frustrated that for every dollar that each of us, including myself, send to Ottawa, we get far less than $1 back. And the delta that, a huge amount, billions of dollars go to Quebec. And the only reason Quebec is able to receive that money is because Hydro-Quebec revenue is not included in the calculation. So is Quebec going to agree to a revision on the equalization calculation? No. They haven't in the past. Premier Kenney had a referendum on this, and he wrote to Quebec and they said no.
Just so people understand, Alberta's oil revenue is included in the equalization formula. But the revenue that Quebec generates from selling hydroelectricity to their own population, but also throughout New England, that is not accounted for in the equalization formula. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So there's these fundamental imbalances. So Albertans, now let's go back to your core question, because I think it's a great question. What else would need to change? The reality that's so frustrating for Albertans is the ratio of people to a House of Commons seat. There's far fewer people, voters, each riding in many places in Eastern Canada have far fewer people in them. So our vote's not worth the same. So no matter what you do, unless you make a fundamental structural realignment of the House of Commons and how seats are allocated, our voice is never going to matter. And we're one of the primary economic engines of this country. And voters in Eastern Canada elect people who bring in policies that hold our economy back. Remember, RBC released a report that in the last 10 years, over $1 trillion, that's $1,000 billion, have left Canada. And a large part of that is because of the lost investment opportunity that was here in Alberta as a result of federal policies that are supported by the voters in the rest of Canada. We don't see the world through the same lens. Canada's too big. We're seeing it right now. The cattle industry had a press conference in Ottawa yesterday, and they're worried that in order for some needs of Eastern Canada and Central Canada to be met, they're going to be thrown to the wolves. We saw it with the EV canola fight with China. If Alberta was an independent country, and if Alberta becomes, Saskatchewan will follow very quickly. So if Alberta and Saskatchewan are independent of Canada, then the Chinese would not be able to extort the canola industry at the cost of the Ontario EV sector automotive thing. They wouldn't have that play.
Okay, but I would argue this on that front. One, accepting Chinese EVs would not put you in good stead with the Americans. And that would be an independent Alberta's largest market. They would not want Chinese EVs flowing in. Secondly, China is a horrible customer for canola, whether it's coming out of Alberta or Saskatchewan. Because why? Well, they did a complete ban from 2020 to 2022.
Oh, it's so unpredictable.
They screwed you over in 2017, in 2013, 14. And I say this as someone with family members who are growing, they're getting ready for seeding in canola in Saskatchewan right now. So I get that issue, but I've made this argument to Scott Moe. They're not a reliable partner. So, I wouldn't go down that route.
Yeah,
On the issue.
Wait a minute. Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
You drove off the road on me there. So you've got an unreliable partner. So you're going to give them more tools to mess with you? Right?
Oh, no, I don't want them to.
So all you're doing is
send in the EVs.
We wouldn't have that vulnerability that they used this time successfully had Alberta been independent. So, but there's so many other reasons, Brian. It's not just that.
You would have the vulnerability of selling them beef that they would turn around and say, "Oh, your beef's no good. Your beef doesn't meet our quality." China is just the worst trading partner. In Central Canada, across the country, I know there's a lot of people that think the United States is the worst. No, pay attention to China. China is the worst trading partner you can have. As soon as you annoy them, they invent a reason that your product is no good. whether it's oil, natural gas, beef, pork, seafood, canola.
And Mark Carney is taking the position that all of the oil that's produced in Alberta needs to have a new significant cost added to it just to get to that unreliable market. So right now, 80, 90% of our exports every day of our oil go to the United States. The United States, did you hear Secretary of State Rubio this week saying this whole carbon tax thing is dead? And he was bragging about or boasting about how America ended it globally. And they don't want our producers to pay a carbon tax to Ottawa. Carney's insisting on it, insisting not just that we have this carbon tax and net zero costs added to oil we would ship to Asia, but all of our existing production, 80 to 90% of our production. It's economic suicide. It's folly. And finally, all of the CEOs are calling Carney out on this, saying it's nonsense, it's harmful to the Canadian economy. An economist, I believe it was with the Fraser Institute, I may have the institute wrong, but recently released a study saying that if all the costs associated with net zero, carbon taxes, methane regulations, etc., are implemented, it could cause any further production in Alberta to stop in terms of new production, and in time make Alberta's third largest reserve of oil in the world a stranded asset. Albertans are done with this nonsense.
To go back to a previous point that you made about Alberta not having equal representation, the approximate average of population per riding in Alberta is about 120,000. In Ontario, it's about 121,000. So your province, my province, we're about equal. We're just slightly higher than you, less than 1%. Quebec is at about 110,000. You go to the Atlantic provinces, and those are the big issues. 74,000 per riding in Newfoundland, 41,000 per riding in Prince Edward Island, 90,000 per riding in Nova Scotia, and 78,900 in New Brunswick. So, your beef isn't with me. Your beef isn't with Ontario. And even to a large degree, it's not really with Quebec. It's with Atlantic Canada.
Well, no, it's broader than that, because what it illustrates is even if you were to adjust it, it still doesn't make a fundamental change. And that's why I say Canada's too big. It's too big of a optimal governing unit. Like, nobody's really examined that, I think. Is Canada, if we could just in a very unemotional way say, is Canada, with its 10 provinces, with its size and its geography and its location to the largest economy in the world, is this really the optimal organization for it? Let's pretend it's a corporation and you and I are looking at it as to whether there's a better way to run the thing. And I believe that, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of countries in the world that are far smaller than Alberta. When you look at it from a population, an economic, and a geographical landmass and location point of view, there's every good reason why Alberta would be incredibly successful. And we wouldn't have to keep every day negotiating with Ontario and Quebec saying, hey, we've got a new business idea to employ more Albertans, generate more wealth, and improve the standard of living here. Can we please go and do it, sir? And that's what we have to do right now. And the answer is always no.
Respond to the argument that you'd be landlocked, though, and wouldn't be able to easily export your goods, because that's what I'm always hearing.
Questions?
You think that's an easy one? Okay,
it is.
Why?
All right, because think about that. There's two concepts to landlocking. There's the concept of physical location, and then there's the concept of embargoing. In other words, policies. There's an embargo on Iran right now. Okay, in other words, other actors can, through a policy, block you. The problem with Alberta is not our physical location. It's the policies. The federal government, the Carney government, isn't even following the Constitution. Section 92, the Section 92.10, I think it's A, subparagraph A, that is designed to prevent any one province from preventing interprovincial works. Only the federal government can approve that. We had it all tested on the TMX when the BC government tried to block it.
Only the federal government can approve or block.
Correct.
But he's allowing BC to block a pipeline.
Well, he's granted them an extra unconstitutional veto. He said to EB
yes.
and to the First Nations, neither of which have a veto at law, and he's given it to them. So we have a policy block, but let's just ignore that. Let's assume that wasn't a thing. And Alberta's independent. British Columbia would become embargoed if British Columbia embargoed independent Alberta. What I mean by that is right now we supply daily the oil and other energy products to the Burnaby refinery from Edmonton through the TMX pipeline. If that pipeline is turned off, it's 5 to 10 days before the Lower Mainland is completely out of fuel. The airport's closed, nobody's driving, everything's shut down. Now, I would never want that to happen, obviously. But when Peter Lougheed was negotiating with Ottawa back in the day and got the Section 92A amendment to the Constitution, one of the things you may or may not remember he announced, because it was a long time ago, is he announced that he was going to cut the flow off down to 85%, a Line 9, supplying Sarnia and Pearson and refineries in Quebec. And that caused such a shock, the vulnerability that central Canada had to its energy supplies, that it came to the negotiating table. That was just threatening to reduce it to 85% of its flow, not reduce it by 85%. So $8 billion worth of goods from British Columbia, from wines to agricultural products to their mining project. They have a lot of mined products that need to go by rail to smelters in Quebec and other places to get refined into other more usable metals. They have 80% of the containers that arrive at Prince Rupert and the Port of Vancouver from Asia that have all that stuff in it that you buy at Canadian Tire and Walmart in Ontario come through Alberta on our roads or rail. We freely allow that to happen. I think we would freely allow that to happen as an independent country, and we would expect a reciprocal arrangement. So we have tremendous leverage, tremendous negotiating leverage with both Ontario and Quebec. Or sorry, Ontario and Quebec, yes, but more what I meant to say there was British Columbia. So right now we're embargoed by policy that prevents us from getting our goods to particular markets. And on top of that, 90% of Alberta's trade is north-south. Please, everybody listening, look at a map. North-south to the largest economy in the world. We're okay. You know, the impact, even if there's a temporary disruption in our ability to go east-west, is minimal.
So are you part of the group? I know it's not a large part of the group. Are you part of the group that says Alberta should separate from Canada in order to join the United States?
Absolutely not.
Why not?
Because the first and obvious reason is we're tired of having a master in Ottawa. We're tired of going on bent knee. You know, here's another $10 billion for the Canadian economy. May we get permission, sir, to work harder tomorrow to produce more? We're tired of having a master in Ottawa, and an ideological one that has crazy policies that we find offensive and dangerous, like this growing use of MAID. And I could keep going. So it's not just economic. So we don't want to, but more fundamentally, Albertans who believe that Albertans and their children and their grandchildren will be better off as an independent country do not want to substitute a master in Ottawa with a master in Washington. And then there's the Americans have a fundamental problem. The reason Trump's not talking about it is it's been pointed out to him that the only way he can get the votes in the House of Representatives in the United States is to have the Democrats support it. And the Democrats aren't going to support it unless they get Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico becoming states. That would shift the political power balance because those are blue regions, always vote blue. So it would preclude and limit the ability for the Republicans to hold power in the future. So Albertans don't want it. Albertans are proud and confident. We don't need Ottawa, and we don't need Washington. we know we can go it alone.
So, look, I've looked at the polling. Even among those that want Alberta to leave Canada, support for those who want Alberta to become part of the United States is quite low. But you listen to what folks are saying here in central Canada, and they're saying, oh, well, all of this talk of Alberta separatism is foreign interference coming from the United States. What do you say?
It's nonsense.
Why?
It's just nonsense. Like, because, well, I can literally go on for hours as to all of the advantages for Albertans leaving. These are all things that I've been observing and thinking throughout my adult life and becoming manifestly clear over the Trudeau-Carney era. And I have yet to have anybody, and maybe we can do this in a minute, explain to me why my children would have a better future staying in debt-ridden, ideologically driven Canada with its increasingly authoritarian approach to the world with censorship and everything else. I don't need the American. These ideas did not come from the United States. They did not come from Russia. They did not come from China. They came from me. And they came from hundreds of thousands of Albertans have reached these conclusions on their own. This notion that we're so, I don't know, unintelligent or something that we can't formulate these opinions is just a further affirmation that we don't see the world through the same lens, and we shouldn't be hanging out with other Canadians. We should go alone.
So when I listen to you talk, you do make an economic argument, but you do also keep coming back to philosophical points. Do you just feel that Alberta and Albertans are disconnected from the mainstream view, be it here in Toronto or, perhaps more importantly for the current government, Montreal and Ottawa?
Yeah, I do. Well, I think everybody's entitled to have a view about the role they want government to have in their lives. And when I travel to the other parts of the country, I'm always struck, and I'll say to my wife, we're not the same. We're just not the same. Like when I did my first year of law school, over 30 years ago, 34, 35 years ago at Osgoode Hall in North York, at York University. Wow, well, the architecture was spectacular. It was like, oh, did the designer of Chernobyl's tomb design this law school building? Is there a reason there's not a single window on the place? Anyway, I digress. But my point is, I left there after a year because I was so struck. Like, let's just give you a little tiny example. One Friday night, we were going to have a party in law school. It was a lot of hard work. There wasn't a lot of parties. And we had to go to 2 or 3 different places because somebody wanted beer. And there was 10 employees in there. And I'm just like, what? Alberta, you can go anywhere. It's privatized. You go in, there's one worker. They have the beer in a cooler on a tilted thing and they use gravity and you just take the beer thing out and the next one rolls in. And then we had to go to somewhere else because it was a government thing and it was only certain many. And I'm just like, why do people put up with this? This makes no sense.
You got to come back to Ontario where alcohol sales are much better now.
Yeah, but no,
much better now.
It's still
but
pathetic.
I understand what
I
you're
was
saying.
stuck there in 2022. It's still ridiculous. But you guys are okay with that. Albertans aren't. I don't know if you privatized your registries yet. Here, there are registry services for motor vehicle licensing, registering, marriage certificates that are open 24 hours, 7 days a week. Okay? And you walk in and you are out and they can give you every single thing you need to get from the government. There's checks and balances. There has not been fraud. There has not been scams. It's hyper efficient. It's super low cost. In Ontario, you guys seem totally content to stand in lines and waste your time. So we're different. This is people that I bring from Ontario to visit with me, and they see these things. They go, wow. It's almost like taking them to Disneyland.
All right, we got to take a quick break. When we come back, I'll ask you when you actually became a separatist, Keith. Back in moments.
Fox News is now streaming live on Fox One. When it matters most, Turn to the voices you trust. We go beyond the headlines, bringing you the stories you won't hear anywhere else. Live coverage, sharp analysis, real perspective. At home or on the go. Stay connected when it counts. Stream Fox News on Fox One. Download today.
From hidden Mediterranean gems to the wilderness of Antarctica, Silversea invites you to explore the world in greater depth. Venture to over 900 destinations across all 7 continents. On board small ships that set the standard for elite ocean travel. Every journey opens doors to extraordinary discoveries. And wherever you sail, you can expect the same Silversea promise. Unrivaled service, unmatched comfort, and unforgettable memories. Visit silversea.com to learn more.
America's yours to explore. Visit your Chevrolet Certified Service Center for their buy 3, get 1 for $1 offer on select tires with installation. Plus, earn stackable rebates so you can travel with confidence in your Chevrolet. Visit Chevrolet.com/service offers to learn more. At participating U.S. GM dealers only. Highest or equal value tire will be $1. Not available with other offers. See dealer for full details. Offer ends May 31st, 2026.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice, that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country. And it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of the emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Post-media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. We'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026 anywhere you get your podcasts.
Keith, I said off the top, why would a nice boy from Burlington, Ontario want to make Alberta a separate country? And I just said that because you and I know each other, and I know you grew up in Southern Ontario. You moved to Alberta later. At what point did you end up saying, this isn't working, that Alberta should be separate? Because you didn't arrive in Alberta with that position. What was it that made you say, Confederation isn't right?
Well, it was two things. It was one, I also lived for 6 years in Vancouver in my late teens and early 20s. And I was driving back from Vancouver and driving towards Edmonton. And I remember coming over a ridge line and I could see beautiful valley vista with farmers out in their fields baling. You know, the tractors busy in the fields and people busy, and then the highway was busy with trucks hauling goods, and then there was a train coming that kind of overpassed the highway, snaking. It was a beautiful shot, and it was full of all kinds of goods that had been produced and resources in Alberta, and I thought, wow, what an industrious people. And we really are different, having lived in 3 different parts of the country. There's a real entrepreneurial drive here. There's a real get her done. So that was one thing, but the most turning point for me was realizing how very few things the federal government actually does. You know, most of the things that impact any one of us in a day are done by municipalities and from a governmental point of view and the province. The federal government has very, very few roles in our daily lives. And then I looked at the extent to which they do them extremely poorly that any of us will experience when we go to renew our passport, and particularly if it's in a rush and you've got to go to a passport office and see how terribly things are run by the federal government. And then once I saw how they were holding Alberta back and most acutely threatening the future prosperity for my children and my grandchildren. So it was a progression of all those factors coming together.
Do you believe that you've got the signatures now, but do you believe that Premier Danielle Smith will follow through on the promise and allow the referendum to happen?
I do. She's kind of boxed in. I think my suspicion would be, and I haven't talked to her about this, so I'm just guessing. My suspicion would be that she would prefer a world in which she didn't have to hold an independence referendum in October. But she has to. And the reason she has to is...
That's interesting because a lot of people in central Canada think Premier Smith is a separatist.
No, she's not.
I don't think so either. I know her. I think she's a federalist. But there's this view, she's definitely a separatist. She just wants Alberta on its own. You don't see it that way.
No, I don't. Because she believes in democracy. And she believes in letting the people have a say. She believes in referendum, and she believes in citizen petition. And what you're seeing is the end product or the outflow of that process, because a former deputy premier, Thomas Lukasik, in the summer had a citizen initiative petition as well and achieved the signature threshold to call for a referendum on Alberta staying in Canada. So she has a mandate to hold a referendum from that alone. I'm not sure what's going to happen with all the attempts by a few First Nations chiefs to block the pure Alberta wants to leave petition, should Alberta cease to be part of Canada petition. But she already has a legal mandate to hold one. And politically, the polls vary, but at least 70% of the UCP membership, her party, the ruling party in Alberta is the United Conservative Party, the UCP, are separatists. So she could lose
I've
power.
seen it a bit lower at like 60, but sure, it's a majority.
Yeah, it moves around. I've seen it as high as 72 and as low as 60. So it's if you're the leader of a political party, just looking at this objectively from a political science point of view, you have to be responsive to your base. And the real danger, and former Premier Kenney has spoken to this a number of times recently, and I agree with him, is that if she doesn't hold a referendum, the base will split. A new political party will likely form on the right. And then the new government of Alberta in the next election will be an NDP government, as happened once before. So she's kind of stuck where she has to move forward with this. And the only thing that I see potentially stopping the independence wave is fundamental wholesale reforms from the federal government and the provinces, allowing Alberta to achieve its potential and allowing us to remove ourselves from a lot of the socialized policies and these ideological policies, And because they're ideological policies and they're driven by ideology, they're not going to do that.
Well, so that's kind of where I wanted to go next is, let's say, okay, the referendum goes ahead in October. Are you looking to separate, or are you looking for what Ted Byfield used to call refederation, where you want the federation to change again? Kind of going back to what we talked about earlier, the firewall letter, that there are a series of changes that could be made. I outlined some of them, but now it would also include ensuring pipeline development, or ensuring that LNG becomes part of the Alberta export economy. Are you looking to fully separate or refederate? And if you're looking to fully separate, would you acknowledge that there's part of the movement leaning towards separation that would be okay with a New Deal per se?
Absolutely. There would be a lot of people who there's a lot of people who are not yet separatists or support independence, who are deeply troubled about the lack of fairness in the relationship with the rest of Canada. And what I like to emphasize is, and I'll be brief on this, is that Alberta's not, we're not getting jackhammers around our four borders and bringing in a moving truck like you move a house and moving it down the road. We're still going to be here. And if you want to fly to Vancouver from Ontario, you're still going to need to fly through our airspace, et cetera, and the rail and the car and all of these things. So I think what would happen is that Alberta would enter into a bilateral trade agreement and a free movement of goods and cooperation agreement with the rest of Canada and the other provinces. But so it wouldn't end. There wouldn't be these big steel barriers put up, and we would never talk again. But
well, good, because I quite like Stampede, quite like the rest of the province.
Well, there's a lot of beautiful things here, yes, and we wouldn't want to impair people from moving to stay together with family from one side to the other. So it would require. I just can't see Ottawa wanting to give up control over our lives. Ottawa, as Carney just demonstrated with his comments on doubling down on net zero. He wants to tell us how to live our lives. And Albertans don't like that. We want to decide how we want to live our lives consistent with what we see as priorities, not what Ottawa sees as priorities. So, but I do agree with you that there are a lot of Albertans who would be satisfied with a reconfederated arrangement. My point is that none of the options short of an independence vote give us any leverage. And former Premier Kenney's equalization referendum proves that. He had a referendum, a clear majority of Albertans wanted a renegotiation of equalization, the equalization program, and how much money we send to Ottawa. And he then wrote to the Prime Minister to open up a dialogue on it, and the Prime Minister said no. And then Premier Kenney at the time wrote to the other First Ministers and said, let's hold a First Ministers meeting to discuss it. And they said no. And that was the end of it. There was nothing he could do.
Well, because most of them are taking,
of course they are. So this is my point,
I'm ashamed to say, Ontario.
Just to emphasize this, the only option that forces the federal government to the table, that forces, as a matter of law, constitutional law, forces the province to the table and gives Alberta negotiating strength, is a clear majority voting on a clear question for independence on October 19th.
So do you feel like a second-class citizen within Canada? Do you believe or feel or think that those who are supporting your movement now believe that you're second-class citizens within your own country?
I don't know if they feel second class. They feel abused, and shackled and forced to pay for things that they find offensive. Whenever I watch the pattern, whenever there was a new scandal around Prime Minister Trudeau, Justin Trudeau, he would say, we go from having a Pride Week to announcing, it's Pride Month, and then people out here in Alberta would lose their minds. And then he gets into another scandal, and he would make a really blatant, deliberate announcement that the federal government is now going to increase their annual spending on, identity political stuff by $200 million to $500 million. And then people would lose their minds. It was a wedge issue. It was a distraction issue. And it worked. So we're just tired of those games. Albertans want to get back to basics, so many of us, and we just know our potential. It's remarkable. We have so much potential. And it's not just oil and gas. We have an incredible aviation sector. We have an incredible manufacturing sector. We're very innovative. We have incredible agriculture, not only agriculture, but food processing and agribusinesses. So we're an extremely diversified economy, but we have the blessing of having the third largest reserve of oil and gas in the world, right beside the largest economy in the world.
You've mentioned Premier Jason Kenney a couple of times, former Premier Jason Kenney a few times. He was elected after the NDP Rachel Notley government, saying that he would stand up for Alberta, fight for Alberta. He was deposed in part because some people felt he didn't, also because of handling of COVID. He was attacked from the left and the right on that. And you ended up with Premier Danielle Smith, who was elected in part to say that she would stand up to Ottawa. Look, I hear all the time that our Premier, Doug Ford, is a liberal who stands with Mark Carney way too much. As much as Doug Ford praises Prime Minister Carney, I haven't seen people as effusive about Prime Minister Carney as I have Scott Moe in Saskatchewan and Danielle Smith in Alberta. Two Western premiers in areas where there is a separatist movement talking about how great he is. Do you feel like she's standing up enough for Alberta? Is she playing a game of trying to negotiate art of the deal her way into something better for Alberta? How does that play? Because I know how Premier Ford saying anything nice about Mark Carney plays in Ontario. Those who love Carney love him a lot. Those who hate him, they're driven to distraction by Ford saying that. How does that play in Alberta? Because, as I said, there's one premier out west who's gone on a couple of trade missions with him. They can't stop saying enough good things about him. Is that a net positive? Is it a negative? Is it a betrayal of those who said she will fight for Alberta in ways that Kenney and Notley didn't?
Well, I think a lot of Albertans are very supportive of Premier Smith because of so many sensible policies she's brought in. For example, we got rid of tabulators, so if you're going to vote in an election, you got to physically be there and put an X on a piece of paper and have a human count it. I could just go on, the changes she made to the curriculum and trying to get ideology out of our schools. She's done some incredibly good policies that are very reflective of the aspirations and the concerns of Albertans. And that gives her a lot of political clout. It gives her a lot of political credit, political capital. Political capital, that's the term I think is most appropriate. But there's some Albertans who want her just to become a separatist. I'm not one of those. I think her job should be to go down the middle and try and make Canada work, but also let democracy work as well. But I do think it was an error, a well-intended error, good intentions, with the MOU. The MOU was a scam completely from the beginning. It was a bad deal. And could you imagine you and I doing an agreement on something, and the next day you see me at a podium putting in something that you and I know will block the agreement from going ahead? That's bad faith dealing. When Carney stood up and said, I just did this deal for a pipeline to the coast as long as Premier Smith imposes this incredibly costly regime, making the oil and gas industry particularly uneconomic across the board to get this one pipeline to Tidewater. Oh, but by the way, I just gave the Premier Eby and the First Nations a veto to block it. Like, come on. So the whole thing's a bad deal. The oil industry's finally come out vocally, publicly, and said, this is a bad deal. It's going to hurt the industry. There's not going to be a pipeline because there's no oil company that can produce the oil to put oil in the pipe. So I think that was a mistake, but she has wide support. I still support her. I think she's a great premier. I think she needs to continue to walk up the middle on the separatism issue and let Albertans decide. And she has a very difficult job.
You mentioned earlier court challenges by Indigenous groups. How do you deal with the fact that there are treaty lands? That in itself would make joining the United States difficult. There are treaties with the Crown. But I have spoken to people who are Alberta separatists who say, oh, it's simple. We remain part of the Commonwealth. We remain part of the Crown. And those treaties remain. It's just that Alberta is no longer part of Canada. Where do you stand in this?
It's actually, people are saying what you just said, but they're getting some of their facts wrong, and you've accurately described what they're getting wrong. And it's this. The treaties, all of Alberta is covered by treaties, unlike Ontario, and definitely unlike British Columbia. Those treaties were entered into in the 1800s, before Alberta was a province. So the jurisdiction of Alberta changed over the course of the treaties, and it came into existence. And the treaties were still honored, and there was no adverse impact on any First Nations rights at all. Then, when Alberta, unlike Central Canada, Alberta and Saskatchewan, when they were formed as provinces in 1905, the federal government maintained ownership of all of the Crown lands in the province, including the oil and gas, including the water. And it was a major point of aggravation, led to a separatist movement. In 1930, there was the Natural Resources Transfer Agreement, whereby all of the lands in Alberta that are subject to treaty were transferred. All of the Crown lands were transferred from the federal government to the Alberta government. There was a clause, and this is part of our constitutional documents. The 1930 Transfer Agreement is a constitutional document. There's a clause in there that said the province agrees that by taking over control and getting ownership of all this land and all the minerals and all the resources, that it will honor the treaties. And the Alberta government will ensure that all of the First Nations traditional rights are honored. Hence, First Nations here do not have to get hunting and fishing licenses, for example. So we already have an example that's worked in the real world. It's not hypothetical. This worked. There was a change in governmental structure. There was a change in governmental ownership and control of domain of sovereignty. And it had zero adverse impact on the First Nations. So what we're hearing from a few select chiefs who are taking these positions without consulting their people on their own is just fear-mongering. I think it's political favor-seeking for Ottawa. It's got no basis in fact or law. History has shown that Alberta, the lands subject to their treaty can change, and there's no adverse impact. There's also the Jay Treaty from the 1700s that allows First Nations, ever since the 1700s, to move freely across the U.S. border, for example. They don't have to present a passport. You do, I do. They just have to present their treaty card. So we already have a proven example of if Alberta becomes a country and it's an international border, we'll adhere to the Jay Treaty from the 1700s, and they'll have free movement.
All right. This is why I like talking to you, Keith. I disagree with you, but you actually have answers, and you've thought through the questions ahead of time. So I don't wish you well in your referendum, but I do wish you well personally. And thank you once again for the time and the conversation.
Very important discussion for not only Albertans, but all Canadians. So I thank you for the opportunity, Brian. It was appreciated.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Proulx, theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. Please make sure you hit subscribe, share this on social media, tell your friends about us. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.
There were so many missed opportunities to catch this before the devastating thing happened.
A third of them we found literally in the phone book. These people were not afraid. They knew that nobody was effectively hunting them. They knew they had escaped justice. that they were going to die in their beds.
When I give talks at law schools, is that the charter ultimately is empowering a minority, and it's empowering a minority that's a guild across the country. And it's a fairly elite guild, and the guild is lawyers.
Families who were split by referendum and brothers and sisters who never talked to each other for years after the referendum because they were so angry at each other because of emotions on both sides.
The reason he was assassinated was not because he was trying to put a satellite into space, but because the gun that he was creating had other applications that made him and the gun very dangerous.
It's finally here. A new season of Canada Did What? Host Media podcast that revisits the big Canadian political events you might think you remember and tells you the real story you never knew. I'm Tristan Hopper. The voices you just heard are from our brand new Season 2. We will unpack some of the pivotal moments that helped define our country, often without a vote, usually without a plan, and sometimes without anyone admitting what they'd done. We'll find out how Canada became a welcoming paradise for untold numbers of Nazi war criminals after the Second World War. We let them build monuments to their wartime exploits and even ended up honoring a Nazi fighter in the House of Commons. And I'm sorry to say that none of that happened by accident. We'll bring you the little-known story of a troubled Canadian rocket scientist who turned to a sinister life of selling giant guns to terrible people. And if that sounds like a spy novel, it ends like one too. You'll hear the behind-the-scenes story of Quebec's attempted secession from Canada, and how very close we came to a political crisis that would have made Brexit look like a picnic. You'll hear about how the much-celebrated Charter of Rights and Freedoms turned into something its creators never wanted, and how many of the most extravagant warnings about the document were all quickly proven true. And you'll even hear about how authorities bungled multiple chances to stop the deadliest terrorist attack in our country's history, and then proceeded to pretend it never happened. These aren't dusty history lessons. They're stories about power, ambition, madness, and the things about Canada that a lot of people would rather ignore. But not you. You won't want to miss an episode. Subscribe to make sure you get all of Season 2 starting March 2026, anywhere you get your podcasts.